All right, the first ingredient is clarity. How do you make your point clearly? It's got to be clear. The second ingredient is brevity. How do you get to the point quickly? How do you not waste people's time? The third ingredient is context. How do you help people see how your point or how your message fits in for them? How does it make sense for them? The fourth ingredient is impact. How do you make it stand out? How do you make it memorable? And the fifth ingredient is value, which is fairly self-explanatory. How do you make your message valuable for the people who are consuming it? 5 ingredients that will go into every communication meal: clarity, brevity, context, impact, and value.
A good communication strategy for your project. I have several elements that I would like to talk about during this presentation. First, we'll talk about the basic elements of a communication strategy. Then I will say something about the principles that our program decided to adapt. After that, I'll say something about some communication activities that you need to consider when planning your strategy. And finally, I'll tell you how to put all these points into your application form. So let's start with the key elements of a good communication strategy. You might ask yourself, why communication? For our program and for your projects, communication should really be the tool to make your project a success. So your communication strategy should help you reach the project objectives. You can ask yourself how to really define an objective. Well, objective is a specific result that project partners want to achieve within a given time frame and with available resources. This sounds probably very theoretical. So let's give it some color. You've probably heard about setting goals that are SMART. S-M-A-R-T. Well, what does it really mean? These goals, these objectives need to be specific, measurable, attainable. Ask yourself whether you are in a position actually to reach that goal. They also have to be relevant. Do they really fit into the program you're applying for? And finally, they need to be time-bound. This still might be a little bit theoretical for you, so let's go for an example. I have an example for you from a project that is focusing on SMEs. So, for example, an objective of such a project can be increase rate of business creation by 15% on average among young people in participating regions by 2019 through modifying policy instruments addressing that issue. Well, you see all the color codes. So the green increase rate of business creation shows that this is something that you can actually reach, that you can attain as an institution that is dealing with business creation. By 15% on average, this is the measurable part. You give it a number that you will measure at the end. Among young people, this is the part that shows you that your objective is specific. By 2019 gives it the time limit, the time bound that you need for your objective. And the blue part, the fact that you want to modify policy instruments, that is what is relevant for our program. Now, what about communication? What does communication have to do with this? Well, objectives of communication are slightly different. Communication wants to inform, we want to persuade or engage people. But all this needs to be done so that the objectives of a project can be put in place. So if I translate this again into a specific example, you can say that a communication objective for that specific project can be, for example, to persuade policymakers that youth entrepreneurship is still a political priority, and they really need to sign the action plans that you will be developing by a certain date. And you give it again the time and the measurable element. That means, for example, you ask yourself or you set a goal that you want to have 4 action plans signed by 2019. But you can ask yourself, who are these people? That's the target groups. You need to think about the specific groups, the specific people that you want to talk to, that you need to inform, that you want to persuade, that you want to engage. These people for your projects need to be those somehow linked to decision-making processes, those people that are involved in policy implementation, or you can think about the end users. Who you really put in your application and in your communication strategy then depends on the objective of your project, on the policy instruments and policies that you are addressing, also on your regional context. But apart from that, it's very important what resources you have available and what you can use. So think about the value of money of your communicating. Do you communicate with the right people? Do you use the money wisely to spread the messages that you need to? So before selecting your target groups, analyze them. And how do you do that? Well, the first step of this target group mapping is to list all those important people, all those who are involved in decision making, all those who can have some effect on policy making, on implementation of the policy, also of those who are the end users, because if you don't include them, they may affect whether you will be successful in implementing your policy change. So you list them and then you think about their interest in your topic and their influence on it. And you will use a very simple matrix. You can rate from, let's say, 1 to 5 how interested they are in your area. So you give them 1 if it's very low, you give them 5 if their interest is very high. And you do the same thing for the same group in terms of their influence, in terms of their power on that specific policy. If they are the policymakers, if they are those who are making the decisions, their influence is very high, so you probably give them 5. If they're not, you give them a low influence. And based on these ratings, you just put them in the grid. And wherever they fall, that's how you pick who you focus on. So for you, the key group is really in the right-hand side corner. That's the group that you need to manage closely. You need to be in very close contact, inform them, persuade them, engage them in your activities so that your project objectives are reached at the end of your project or afterwards. On the other side, there is the group that is not really interested or doesn't have any influence over your policy area. You still need to monitor them a little bit because you want to avoid any bad surprises if some of them start negative campaign against your goals or your objectives. So monitor them, check what they're doing, but don't spend too much resources on that group. Then a very important group is in the left-hand side corner. Those are people with very high influence, but not such, those people that are not that interested in what you're doing. You should really keep them satisfied because you don't want anyone who's very influential going against you. Keep them satisfied and even try to bring them into the corner that's next to them among the key group. Increase their interest, or at least try. And the final group that you might consider, and you probably should consider bringing in, are those who are very interested but maybe not that influential. Check with them your ideas, consult with them, send surveys among them and see what they think about your suggested changes. Because they might have very good ideas how to bring your policy change forward. Now, we have a little tool for you that's called Target Group Engagement Table. And here, if you fill it in with all the information that you have just put together with your selected target groups, it will be the basis for your communication strategy. So just always put in the first column the target group that you selected. Next to them, develop the specific message that you want to send to them so that you bring them on board of your project. Then think about the engagement technique or about the activities that will inform them, persuade them, or even engage them in your project. And then give it some time. That means schedule when the activities will happen. And never forget to assign the responsible person, because there needs to be clear responsibility for all the activities you are doing. Fill in this table and you're almost done with your strategy. But never forget that you need to evaluate your performance. You set your objectives at the beginning, but you have to check how you're actually doing with them at the end. We in our program are very focused on results. So become one of us and focus on results too. We know that cooperation works, and it's up to you and up to your communication strategy to show it, to demonstrate it. So whenever you're communicating, be very clear about it, that European cooperation is doing good things to various end users of your policies. Also, we'll be very happy if you always include communicating about what you are doing in the different territories, in different regions. To evaluate your objectives, you need to set yourself some indicators. I have good news for you, because with this new program that we have at the moment, we improved on the indicator side. We used to have 10 indicators that all our projects needed to follow just on the communication side. But now it dropped just to 2. They are not demanding on you, and I will talk about them a little later. But 2 indicators are probably not enough to follow or to evaluate fully the performance of your communication strategy. We believe that different projects have different communication strategies, different approaches to communicating to different target groups. That means that also each project probably will define a different communication strategy and needs to also define different set of indicators that will evaluate performance of such a strategy. So we give you a certain level of flexibility in this respect. But define your indicators, follow them. You don't need to tell us how you're doing, but we'll be very happy to hear about it. What we will monitor will be 2 of them.